Dr. Rachel Toombs was scheduled to teach this class this morning, and I'm obviously not her, and she's not feeling well. So say a prayer for her. So you get the B team, and the B team coach at the middle school I was in the A team, I'm just going to say. But the B team football coach, after every game when they lost, because they lost every game, would always say, "All right, kids, go home, smoke a cigar, have a Snickers." He wasn't there for very long. So after this class, you may need to go home, have a cigar, eat a Snickers, because it gets crazier. So we are going to, last time I taught, which was before Thanksgiving, we made it through chapter 20, but we very briefly touched on chapter 20. And so today we're going to spend a little bit more time in chapter 20, touch on chapter 21, and sort of have a chance, if you have questions, especially thinking next Sunday we won't have this class. The Bishop Fisher will be here. The following Sunday will be our last Revelation class. So if you have questions about the whole of the book, any in particular thing, I encourage you to be thinking of those to ask Rachel when she's back. But you're welcome to ask me these questions as well. Brian and I taught Revelation to men's Bible study a year or so ago. And I did a lot of commentary reading, a lot of study. And at the end of it, I was like, gee, I still feel like I don't understand so much of what's happening, which is not a bad place to be. So we'll read chapter 20 and 21. 21, 22, it starts to get really wonderful, and some of the most beautiful parts of the book of Revelation are at the very end. Chapter 22 in particular is just, it's lovely. Ends on a bit of a downer there, but before you get to the very end, it's quite nice. So just being honest, folks. All right, can I get someone to read chapter 20?
I'll read.
Thank you, Brian. Don't everyone volunteer.
Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain. He seized the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and threw him into the pit, and locked and sealed it over him, so that he would deceive the nations no more, until the 1,000 years were ended. After that he must be let out for a little while. Then I saw thrones, and those seated on them were given authority to judge. I also saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their testimony to Jesus and for the word of God. They had not worshipped the beast or its image, and had not received its mark on their foreheads or their hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy are those who share in the first resurrection. Over these the second death has no power, but they will be priests of God and of Christ, and they will reign with him 1,000 years. When the 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be released from his prison and will come out to deceive the nations at the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, in order to gather them for battle, and they are as numerous as the sands of the sea. They marched up over the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city, and fire came down from heaven and consumed them. And the devil who had deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet were, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. And then I saw a great white throne, and the one who sat on it. The earth and the heaven fled from his presence, and no place was found for them. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. Also another book was opened, the book of life. And the dead were judged according to their works, as recorded in the books. And the sea gave up the dead that were in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead that were in them, and all were judged according to what they had done. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. And anyone whose name was not found written in the book of life was thrown into the lake of fire.
Okay. Lake of fire, it's always a good time. So what images jump out? We talked about this very briefly. I felt like we had to speed through it. What phrases, images, words? Yes.
This is a curiosity question.
Oh, no.
You find often, and I never understood it, throughout English literature,
Mm-hmm.
almost to the Anglo-Saxon, Magog.
Gog
I
and
never know
Magog.
who Magog was, whether I should get acquainted with him or whether
So,
go down
old.
or what.
You don't know old Magog. It's actually Ezekiel. Gog and Magog come up in a passage on, also a sort of eschatological end time sort of passage. They're sort of place names as sort of like Sodom or just forces of evil, places of evil. It's not exactly necessarily a specific place. Yeah, so if you
Is
read
God
Ezekiel,
instead of God,
well,
or
yes.
God, whoever God is.
Gog is. Gog and his Magog. Yeah, Brian, is there anything else? I mean, it is a little confusing. If you read Ezekiel, I think it's 38. You can find more about Gog and Magog. It's the place, Megiddo and all of that is a part of that as well.
Yeah, this is similar to our discussion about Armageddon, if you hear weeks ago for that, which is that these names become, they had probably a particular place name at one point, but they become symbolic.
Yeah.
Right? In the same way that, I don't know, in American literature or in the American imagination, like the OK Corral. Well, that was a real place, and there was an event there, but now when people think about shootouts, that's the image that would come up. And you could use that image, you could keep recycling that to symbolize that, even though I don't even know where it is anymore. I mean, I couldn't locate it on a
Where's the OK Corral?
It's,
Arizona.
Okay.
see, I was going to say Kansas.
Kansas.
Oh, heaven forbid.
So, yeah. So if you read Ezekiel chapter 38, the very beginning of Ezekiel 38, the word of the Lord came to me, mortal, set your face toward Gog of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. Prophesy against them. And we really don't know who Gog and Magog are, other than by the time we get to Revelation, as Brian said, they become signs, symbols, symbolic
What do they symbolize?
places of judgment.
Opposition to God.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other things stand out?
A lot of fire.
A lot of fire, yes. Fire came down from heaven and consumes Satan, the dragon, Gog and Magog, and there's also fire, the lake of fire and sulfur, and the second death, the lake of fire. We can talk about this fire. Fire is often a sign of God's judgment. Very clearly here, that's the case. In the church, many saints have sort of imagined the fire of God's love. That God's love is a consuming fire. The Lord your God is a consuming fire, Scripture says. And if this is God's love, God's love encountering things that refuse to accept it. The wrath of God is a function of God's love. So we want to say, and this is throughout the church, that God is love. It is part of the nature and character of God to be loved. It is who God is. But nowhere in Scripture does it say God is wrath. God is anger. Thank God, by the way. That would be horrible to worship a God of wrath who by nature is wrathful. But there is all this language in Revelation chapter 20 about fire, wrath, judgment. And the Christian tradition has wanted to say throughout the centuries that this wrath and judgment is not separate from God's love. It's not like God has bipolar disorder and he's like love and then he's like angry and love and angry, that actually the wrath is the sort of flip side of his love. In the same way that if you see someone innocent being hurt or wounded, your love for them might take on anger. Like, this is good. All right? You might be angry at the person who is harming them. That's a good and right thing. Anger is not always and everywhere a sin. In fact, it can be sinful. Thomas Aquinas talks about this. Not having anger can be itself a sin because you are letting people be hurt, and you're actually a failure to act and to step in and do something. So that's part of what the fire is connected with as God's judgment, God's wrath, but this is still a part of God's love for the world. I think one of the best portrayals of this is in C.S. Lewis's one of his worst books, which is The Last Battle. It's the worst of the Chronicles of Narnia. I reread it recently. I was like, oh God, like, what is it, like a monkey and the donkey? I get what he's trying to do. Anyway, I'm sure there are people here who disagree. You should read it anyway. You should read all of the Chronicles of Narnia. Not my favorite. I think The Silver Chair is the best because of Puddleglum. But he's the best guy. And there's a scene at the end when all of the creatures of Narnia are invited to enter Aslan's country, which is, if you read chapter 21, is a sort of placeholder for the new heavens and the new earth. And they're entering Aslan's country, heaven, you could think of. And there are these dwarves who have been resistant to Aslan from the beginning. And they refuse to believe their arrogance and their pride. They don't want to be taken in. And so they're actually in Aslan's country. They're actually in heaven. And they're like, this place is horrible. Like, no, I don't see it. Like, everyone's trying to help them. And they're like, nope, don't believe it. And it's actually, their experience of heaven is like it's a hell. And I think one of the ways that we can think of fire, wrath, and judgment is that perhaps for some, the love of God directed at them would be an abhorrent experience. If you have spent your life filled with hatred or refusing to submit to anything, a heart that is hard and cold, you could see how an experience of love could be painful. This happens. If you can probably think of people you have tried to love in the past. Sometimes it's family members a parent often, that adult children try and get reconciliation and love and restart, and the parent is just like, nope, this is threatening, no thank you. And I think, one of the ways that's helpful for me to think of this as judgment is that. Also worth just keeping to the text that this place of fire and sulfur, the lake of fire, is specifically for the beast and the dragon and the false prophet. I love this. Revelation can be quite specific about the amount of people in heaven, right, before the throne. So we have 144,000, which, remember, is not like, gee, that's a small amount, which in the Jehovah's Witness, I've since learned, that was a big deal for them, and they hit the 144,000. They're like, dang it! We got to adjust our numbers a little bit. It's a sign of the 12 tribes by the 12 apostles. And you also have in Revelation earlier the multitude before the throne. You get the sense of heaven as a crowded place. And this, at the very end of chapter 20, it does tell us, in anyone whose name was not found written in the book of life was thrown into the lake of fire. Well, how many people? Was this a lot of people? This is anyone. What does this look like? And it's delightfully unspecific, which is very hopeful, I think. Sometimes the book of Revelation gets taught as a way to scare you out of hell, to present hellfire as sort of indomitable, and you are like the spider on the web dangling before the fires of hell, to quote a famous sermon. And in fact, that's not the case here. Hell, fire, judgment is there, but it's not the ultimate thing. Yeah.
In your reading, did you come across any commentary on the 1,000 years and what that might mean?
You can't ask that question. So there's a lot of Christian speculation on the 1,000 years. And I think we talked about this a little bit last time. Millennialism, post-millennialism. These are ways of figuring out the 1,000 year. Is it Christ's return fully, the end of all things, and then a 1,000-year reign begins? Or does the 1,000-year reign happen and then Christ comes at the end for all things? Honestly, the 1,000-year bit is one of the hardest parts in Revelation, I think, because what is it? Why is the devil let out? Like, dude, God, you had him in jail. Like, keep him there, please. Like, why would you let him out? I think one of the things we want to say is that part of what Revelation is doing is shaping our imaginations on how to think about and imagine God's victory over all things. And part of it is that the devil is going to be let out so that he can be put right back in. He's let out for, what does it say, 3 months or something? Just for a little while, right? And then he's put right back into the lake of fire. And so I think, that part of it is that it's sort of God's victory parade. Like, yeah, we'll let you out so that we can show everyone, death, Hades, devil, the beast, how defeated you are. It's sort of like, and it's a horrible practice, but what you would have in medieval world, I guess in our own nation, where you would let the defeated, you'd parade the defeated king or people through the city, right? Well, why not just keep them in prison? You caught them. Well, part of it is symbolic to say, look, we're letting him out. They can't go anywhere. And we're going to drive him through the town so everyone can see that the defeat is ultimate and final. Yes, the devil is let out. God is the one who's doing it. Sort of like an ornery cat let out of a cage to just be put right back in, because that's where cats belong. Just joking. No cat hate. I will say, my parents had a cat that had ringworm, and everyone in the whole family got ringworm except for one person. Yours truly. So it served me well. But I think that's part of what this is just imaginatively trying to do. What is it? 1,000 years is a complete number, a long time, but it's we've seen these numbers are sort of symbolic. It's not forever. I don't think part of what we've tried to do in this class is not do this sort of predictive way of reading Revelation, newspaper, apocalyptic, where you sort of say, well, the 1,000 years began at this point when X and X happened, or it will begin at this point. And various people have tried to do this. I believe Augustine talks about the 1,000-year beginning in with baptism, that when the church was baptized. But even Augustine's like, yeah, but don't think about the year too much. Like, don't get overly worried about the time. Yeah. Brian, anything else about the 1,000 year? It is one of the most confusing bits, because I think whenever Revelation gets specific and it's not clearly symbolic, that's where it gets difficult. Like 7, you're like, oh, okay, we know 7, it's perfect. But the 1,000 is not that way.
Yeah, I think the 1,000 is supposed to be symbolic as well. I mean, the jarringness of it is that you have kind of these two endings. And it's a little bit like if you were asked, like, what's a perfect day for you? Like if a genie came and was going to grant you a wish and said, you can have one perfect day. And you said, well, I would love to spend it on a mountainside with my family and friends. And I'd also love to travel to Europe. Well, you can't do both of those things. And so, you might tell the story.
If I had a genie, I could. I'd ask for another wish.
Neal's clearly ahead of the game. What that might look like is, if you're narrating that, is to go on this trip and be gone and spend a whole day like on a mountain with family. But that doesn't make sense, right? You can't actually do both those things in a 24-hour period. But what you're doing is you're getting what both of those symbolize for you: adventure and being with family into the same day. And that's a little bit what Revelation's doing here, is having this symbol of 1,000 years. 1,000 years, 1,000 generations is a symbol of a long, long time. And also the end of like everything being destroyed. So it's a way of getting both those things into the story at one time.
Yeah, and the point is, the first 1,000 years, the saints are judging the world. There is Christ's victory, and then the second 1,000 years begins with the ultimate defeat of death and Hades, which should be a hint that this is like, how do you defeat, like, put death in prison?
Well, the other thing that indicates its symbolic nature is that notice that the people who are raised up, so the souls of those who had been beheaded, this is in verse 4, for their testimony to Jesus. They didn't worship the beast. They came to life and reigned with Christ 1,000 years, but the rest did not come to life. So who are they reigning over? I mean, themselves. Right? So you're trying to communicate that they're raised up to reign, but there's no one they're reigning over because everyone else is dead until the end of it. And so you're trying to get this image of what it looks like to reign, while also keeping in the idea that everyone else is still dead.
That's right. And I do think the first resurrection, second resurrection, this is where I think Augustine's reading of this passage is interesting as like just a spiritual exercise as the baptism as first resurrection that will then share in the second resurrection. That this is what we say in baptism, that you are buried with Christ in his death and you are raised up with him in life, and that actually the Christian, this isn't simply the resurrection as a future event that one will experience, but that's something that one already experiences right now. The defeat over death and the power of hell. And this little babies do this. It's amazing. Yeah. Linda, and then.
Oh, sorry. Milton, no poet would limit himself to 1,000 years. I mean, you've got to string that out into some incredible poetry. And so in Paradise Lost, this is a pivotal moment where Satan stays a long time. He does a lot of damage, and Milton is enjoying dramatizing this. And he's also enjoying seeing Satan disappear. He doesn't so much disappear, but he marches off. And so much of this is, I mean, I hate to encourage you to read more, but that's what...
We always want to encourage, I mean,
well,
chapter 20, there are books.
So, that's just what I do. But you just keep reading.
Yeah.
One will read another.
Yeah.
But Paradise Lost has it's a gloss on much of this.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah. Oh. Other things that stand out to you, we've talked, I believe, last time, there are two kinds of books. There's a book that is opened where people are plural, and everyone is judged according to their works in these books. Everyone. This isn't like the saved people and the damned people or whatever. Like, everyone is judged according to their works in one of these books. And then we have another book, the book of life. And this is ultimately what matters, is are you in the book of life? And that remember, the Lamb is the only one who can unseal this and holds the book of life. And so I think there will be a judgment of our works. This happens, again, in Scripture, talks about judgment of works. And as Christians, we have two things that we're trying to hold to. On the one hand, a sort of confidence and assurance that our names are in the book of life, that if you were baptized into Christ, then you have indeed risen with him, and your name is in the book of life, and you should feel confident and have assurance in that. We say this in the liturgy. When we say the Lord's Prayer, we are bold to say that we boldly pray to God as Father. The flip side is there's also a sense of our works still do matter. Maybe not for our eternal destiny, but what we do on earth it does matter. You inflicting pain and hurt on yourself and other people, it matters. You know this. And if we say that doesn't matter, there's something off about that. That means that there's no consequences to anything, that the evil that you have suffered or that you have inflicted will not be dealt with. And good news needs to take care of that stuff too. The good news needs to take care of the bad things that have happened to me by other people and the bad things that I've done. It takes place in a context, though, of the Lamb who is slain and the book of life. So it's not something that should inspire terror, but a sober confidence in the grace of God. Any thoughts on that? The books there at the end. Other things from chapter 20 before we jump into 21. Lake of fire. You would have, of course, in the Gospels, there's Gehenna, which is an actual place of a burn pit, and just rubbish is constantly burning. I don't know what this is specifically referring to as a place like that, but this is a sort of image. The city dump. We were talking with Elizabeth, my 3.5-year-old, who gets quite excited when the trash truck comes. It's a whole event. Trash truck's here, and I'm like, God, did I put the trash can out? I remembered this week. I forgot the week before. It was bad. A lot of diapers just marinating in the trash can. Anyway, speaking of lake of fire, and yeah, that's right. And so we were explaining to her. She's like, well, where does the trash go, and what does the truck do with the trash? We're like, well, it goes to the dump. She's like, what's the dump? And I was thinking, it's like, it's a place that will never leave the earth. Like this junk, the city dump will outlast us all. Like all the stuff in there will take, some of the plastics will take, thousands of years to break down. No one will remember any of us. And those rotten diapers will still be there as a memorial to my children. But I think actually that's a helpful way to sort of think a lake of fire as something sort of like this, a place that is permanent. Obviously, you get into weird things when you're trying to make these literal, as though it is an actual place where death, it's not a person, doesn't have corporeal form or anything. And in the Christian tradition, it gets weird on this, the lake of fire, and eternal damnation. The church unfortunately gets into some weird stuff. Augustine in City of God gets really strange and slightly horrible. He's like, well, how would people not get consumed by God's fire in the lake? He's like, well, God must eternally be keeping their bodies composed so that they can eternally be suffering. And he's like, that must be it. And you're like, just stop writing, Augustine. Like, it was a weird thought. You don't need to pen it. Keep that to yourself. Go to therapy or something. Talk about that there. But
I think it's illustrative that death and Hades are thrown into the lake of fire, which demonstrates
Hades is hell. How is hell is thrown into hell? Like, what does that even mean?
So that it's not this is not a place, obviously, and it's highly metaphorical. If concepts are being thrown into this image.
That's exactly right. And it gets weird if you try and did any of you all go to a hell house as a teenager? You Episcopalians. Y'all need to get scared more. So hell house was a thing big in the 90s, early 2000s. There's one still. I'm glad to know that that's still happening. Hell house. So it is, I'm getting there. So on Halloween, while your friends are going to the haunted house, scare house, or whatever, as a good Christian, you would take your friends to Hell House, where they would witness someone getting in a drunken car crash, a skit. There's always drunk. There's like drunken sex. Like the only two things you can do wrong: your arrogance, fine. Your judgment of others, you're good. But if you drink and if you have sex, you are clearly going to hell. And so it begins with the car crash. This is the ones I've seen. You walk in the first room. There's a car crash, a skit, and then the people from the car crash who aren't saved, maybe one of them is saved or something, they then go into hell. And you, like a haunted house, you go to hell to sort of witness the horrors there. And the idea, and at the end of it, there's sort of a Jesus juke, like, obviously you don't want to end up here when you die. Scared straight. I mean, literally scaring you straight. And so it was a thing. And it has like a long pedigree in the Christian tradition. A lot of medieval plays would try and do the same sort of thing. You would see people being inflicted in torments. A lot of pastors' sermons have tried to do the same thing. And it's unfortunate. There should be like a proper respect for judgment, and like you shouldn't be cavalier with your life. I think if you read Revelation, you think, yeah, everything's good, I'm all right, then you're not paying attention. But that's also not very helpful. And it imagines like hell as an actual place that you can just visit, which doesn't make sense from here. And I'm using the term hell, which isn't even right. Okay, it doesn't say, it just says the lake of fire. So it's worth noting. Hades is in the lake of fire. No. Yeah.
What's the name of that artist who would show what hell looked like, where people had heads or the top half?
Hieronymus
sex?
Bosch.
Yeah.
One of my favorites. Yeah, actually, I do love Hieronymus Bosch. It is sort of like the original Chick track of quite horrifically portrayed. But this was so when Martin Luther's being Martin Luther in the 16th century, we sang one of translation of Ambrose of Milan hymn in the morning at the service. Martin Luther is sort of reacting, and part of his side story is this terror of hell and judgment. Martin Luther is always talking about the devil, like he's terrified. And he finds assurance in God's grace as a defeat and stay against us, because what you have in the late medieval world, illustrated by Hieronymus Bosch, the doom paint, I don't know what you call them, on the doors of churches, where you walk into the church and you have like an image of doom and judgment and terror. Like, think even of Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel. Everyone just imagines, the patriarchal God, which I think is idolatrous, the Sistine Chapel, by the way. God isn't a dude with a white beard and big muscles. The Father isn't. And the Son isn't either, but also in that Sistine Chapel is a huge wall of the Last Judgment. And it's Jesus, because it's Michelangelo and he's obsessed with this, like in this like weird, like no human ever turns their body this way, but Michelangelo's like, I wonder what a body would look like. And Jesus is obviously like taking steroids and he's casting people into hell. And this is part of the late medieval world that Luther comes out of, that this terror of things like this, used as a way to keep people in line, right? In part, that's a large part of what this is.
I think it was best portrayed in the musical, The Book of Mormon.
That's also another classic work right there. That's exactly right. Yeah, so I don't think, Revelation I don't think is trying to do that. I think it's trying to give you a sober respect for the last things, but not to live. The idea is that actually God is victorious, that death and Hades are defeated by God, that God is the one who's in charge. It's less about my personal individual destiny and more about the victory of God. I mean, we're talking about, it's nations, peoples. It's not a story about my soul before the Lord necessarily. All right, chapter 21. Can I get someone to read? We'll go to verse 14. Okay, thank you.
Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away." And he who is seated on the throne said, "Behold, I am making all things new." Also he said, "Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true." And he said to me, "It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give from the spring of the water of life without payment. The one who conquers will have this heritage, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. But as for the cowardly, the faithless, the detestable, as for murderers, the sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars, their portion will be in the lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death." Then came one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls, full of the seven last plagues, and spoke to me, saying, "Come, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb." And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great high mountain, and showed me the holy city Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God, having the glory of God, its radiance like a most rare jewel, like a jasper, clear as crystal. It had a great high wall with 12 gates, and the gates 12 angels. On the gates the names of the 12 tribes of the sons of Israel were inscribed. On the east 3 gates, on the north 3 gates, on the south 3 gates, and on the west 3 gates. And the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and on them were the 12 names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. So, we have the new heavens and the new earth. That not, as people often portray that you just go to heaven when you die. We have a new heaven, new earth. We have a holy city, a new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven. The barrier between heaven and earth has been destroyed here. God dwells among mortals. You noticed in the line, or the first verse, the sea was no more. So it's worth remembering the people of Israel. It's not like that Robert Frost poem, "People along the shore stare out at the sea," something like that. And why do they stare out there? Well, the people of Israel weren't going to the beach to enjoy it. The sea was a place of terror. Leviathan dwelt in the sea. Chaos. The people of Israel were never great sailors. I know that the disciples were fishermen, but they weren't fishing in the Mediterranean. They were fishing in large lakes. And so the sea, the Mediterranean Sea, was a sign of chaos, of judgment, of frightful things. The opening of Genesis in the whole Scripture begins with, in part, God's defeat of chaos. That the Spirit hovers over the waters, and the waters of chaos are brought to order by the Word of God, by creation. And so the sea is no more, that the forces of chaos, of fear and fright, these things are destroyed by God. Again, not to imagine that when we go to the sweet by and by, there will be no ocean or sea if you really love the beach. It's not like, man, I'm going to miss that. No, that's not. Sea is chaos. And so that is gone. Also, what else is no more? Sorrow, death, crying, pain. It's a way of describing the things to come by negation. What will the life to come be like? What is our hope, right? After we die, this is a real thing. I know sometimes as Episcopalians we try and say, well, we're not just living for the next life, but we are going to die, and it matters a great deal what we think is next for us, for all of creation, for those we love. And so part of what Revelation is doing is by negation, telling us this is what it's not going to be like. There won't be death. There won't be mourning and crying and pain. There won't be chaos. What other things jump out? We've got like 1 minute. I'll let Rachel resume with this.
I would add that the other really significant thing is that there's a city, and cities are human creations. God doesn't need a city or make cities. Humans make cities. In fact, if you go all the way back to the beginning of the Bible,
It's a garden.
It's if humans are in a garden, and the creation of the first city by Cain was, you can kind of see as an act of sin or an act of rebellion. And now this human creation, born in sin, is redeemed.
So on that note, is there significance to specifically naming it Jerusalem? Is that to signify to the audience that this is a city you might recognize or something?
I mean, Jerusalem, we talked about spiritually significant places. Babylon as like a city that's like the worst ever and is a sign of something evil and wicked. And Jerusalem throughout the scriptures, it's the city of David. It's where the temple is, where God dwells on earth. There's all these psalms of ascent, talk about pilgrimage to Jerusalem as this beautiful, holy thing. Jesus' ministry, in so many ways in the Gospels, is him coming back to Jerusalem and him journeying to Jerusalem. So I don't think we're supposed to imagine, this is a spiritually significant, a symbolic place where God dwells. What was Jerusalem when there was the temple? It was the place where God dwelt on earth. And this is what's happening in the next life.
Yeah, I don't think we're meant to take it extremely literally. It's a cube if you measure it out.
Yes.
With
quite small for all the
symmetry,
people it's talked about being able to be in there. It sounds.
Well, but it is a cube. I mean, today's Jerusalem,
a perfect cube.
I don't know, I've measured it.
It is.
I've been there, I guess it seemed like.
Sure, but the idea is that it's perfectly, I imagine it like a jewel that is perfectly created by God, that is proportional, where everything fits and that is good.
Well, the archaeology would bear you out, I think.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yes.
This is sort of skipping ahead. I just think it's beautiful going back to the idea of the garden and the city. But in 22, it talks about what is at the center of the city. It's the tree of life. And so it's like harkening back to the garden. And it's beautiful because it says, on either side of the river is the tree of life with its 12 kinds of fruit, producing each fruit each month. And the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. So it's kind of like we have this human creation, right? This city, and at the center of it is the creation God's given us, and like they're working in harmony in some sense. I just think it's a beautiful.
Yeah, and on that note, like the idea that a tree would give fruit every month of the year is phenomenal, which I think we miss because I can get watermelon HB in February. But
You shouldn't. It's horrible.
But for people in the ancient world, like the fact that you would have fruit like that every single month, that would have been literally miraculous.
I think it's also interesting that they talk about the elimination of darkness.
Yeah.
Because all through the Bible, it's the light is good and dark is bad. And dark would have been scary.
That's exactly right.
You didn't have electricity and you had to go, and do something at night.
So this is not.
Darkness has always been scary.
Some more post-colonial Christians will try and say darkness, like thinking about this racially, how dark light has been used by Christians to map onto white and black in terms of racial stuff. I think, though, I get where they're coming from. It's worth listening to them. But I think the point is about at night.
I think it's the daily life.
When you're going out, if you have to travel from your village anywhere, it is pitch black. And if you've ever been anywhere where there's like no moon out and it's pitch black and you're walking, it's very frightening. And for us, it's like frightening for like a minute, and you're like, okay, there's a light, I'm good. But for them, it would have been. Folks, I got to go. Choir has to get robed. Peace and blessings. Thank you for tolerating me and not having Dr. Toombs with you. But
Thank you.